Precisa ferir a pressão, medir a glicemia ou tomar uma vacina? Na Drogasil tem exames, testes e calendário vacinal completo. E o que é melhor, tem sempre uma Drogasil aí perto de você. É fácil, prático e rápido. Dá para ir entre uma música e outra. Procure nossos farmacêuticos. Quanto mais você conhece o que a gente faz na Drogasil, mais você se cuida.
Ei, você que tá aí curtindo esse podcast, você tem caspa? Ah, então nem precisa mais ficar com vergonha. Chegou a nova linha Dercos Anti-Caspa DS da Vichy. Ela elimina 100% da caspa visível, sem ressecar os cabelos. E para todos os tipos de cabelo, seco, normal ou oleoso. Dá até para usar blusa preta. Não é à toa que a Dercos Anti-Caspa é a marca mais recomendada por dermatologistas no Brasil e no mundo. Saiba mais.
All-star closer Kenley Jansen, we have a question.
What's the best podcast of all time? Baseball isn't boring, baby.
I'm Rob Bradford, and every single day I'm sitting down with the biggest names to show you this great game is the greatest game. It's my podcast. It's my passion. It's a cause I started more than 2 years ago and is now the most prolific national daily baseball pod there is. Another fact. So jump aboard the BIB Express. Follow and listen to Baseball Isn't Boring, presented by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's time. Time to get in the zone. Time to get in the zone with the 49ers Web Zone. This is the No Huddle Podcast with Al and Brian.
What's up, faithful? You're listening to another episode of the 49ers Web Zone No Huddle Podcast, a part of the Odyssey Network. I'm Brian Renick. He's Al Sacco. It's training camp. People are freaking out about Brock Purdy interceptions. Everything feels right in the world. Al, how you doing today, bud?
Dude, I can't. I was thinking to myself the other day, all right, we haven't heard anything. I know pads hadn't come on yet, but we hadn't heard anything about these ridiculous reports. Oh, this QB went 9 for 15. This went 6 for 9. And I thought because there's no controversy, not that there was a controversy last year, but you had, where does Sam Darnold fit? Is Purdy healthy?
Right.
What about Trey Lance? So there's all these stats that for every camp practice. Oh, this guy threw interceptions and oh my God. And I'm like, all right, at least we're not going to have that this year. I don't have to deal with that. I know there's contract drama, but I do not have to deal with that. Well, Brian, listeners, viewers, I
Rookie
spoke
mistake.
too soon because we're back. We're back on the Brock Purdy interception watch, apparently. They're like, oh my God. Oh, Purdy, he threw interceptions in practice. Let me explain to everyone what practice is, especially for an established starter, which Purdy is at this point. He is the unquestioned starting quarterback of the 49ers. He's not trying to win anything. Do you know what he's doing at these practices? He's working on shit. He's working on his game. He's pushing the envelope. He's trying things that he wouldn't try in a game, taking chances. I wouldn't normally do this here because the rush is coming on me, but I'm going to throw this ball. We'll say it's practice. It's practice. These interceptions mean nothing. And people talked about it the whole camp last year, the whole camp, and dude almost won MVP. So if we're in week 3 and he's throwing bad interceptions, you know what? We're going to be on top of it. Everybody will be on top of it, but I can't with the camp stuff. If you want to just report kind of here's what happened, but to be like, he threw a really bad interception over the middle. It was just one of those things where you're like, where is he throwing it? It's practice. It's practice. I can't take it. I cannot take it.
Well, not only that, but for those of you who aren't aware, the 49ers are playing against the 49ers in practice, which means Brock Purdy is going against the 49ers defense. So while Brock Purdy might be throwing interceptions, it also means that the 49ers defense is getting interceptions. And seeing as we want both the offense and the defense to be good this year, that's a good sign. That's a good sign for the defense, right? It's a good sign that the defense is getting interceptions against an MVP candidate from last season, the best offense in the NFL from last season. It is the day 3 of padded practices, maybe day 2. Not sure.
Day
I can't remember.
Day 2.
Yeah, sorry, day 2.
Freaking
Day
2
2 of
days in,
padded
dude.
practices. Let's take 1, 2, maybe 100 steps away from the ledge. If you are freaking out about Brock Purdy interceptions, here's the thing. This is what you want your quarterback to be doing in practice, right? You want him testing himself. You want him testing his own limits, right? Because it's going to allow him to have that information as he goes into a game. Hey, I thought I could do this in practice. I was trying. I kept throwing interceptions. I know I can't do that in the game, right? It's all fine, guys. It's going to be okay. But here's the other thing. Like I said, it also means that the 49ers defense is getting interceptions. That's also a good thing. You know, we've talked about this defense and what we're afraid of when it comes to this defense and run defense. That's our biggest concern. That's where the 49ers Web Zone No Huddle podcast is officially concerned about the run defense. That is our position. We're not coming off that position. But one of the things that we talked about is how deep this secondary is, the secondary room, both the corners, and there's unknowns at safety, but we've heard good things about Malik Mustafa so far in practice. We've heard good things about Jair Brown so far in practice. We've heard great things about Isaac Yadam, both in OTAs and now in training camp. All good things. And one of the things that came out today that I thought was interesting, Diamador Lenore was in front of the mic, and somebody asked him about Brandon Staley. And again, something that we've talked about on the show. It is a unique structure, if you will, on that side of the ball, right? They brought Brandon Staley in, but not as the defensive coordinator. But Diamador Lenore absolutely singing Brandon Staley's praises today. Called him a genius. Said he loves what he brings to the room, right? The secondary room, which is where he's kind of focusing his attention. You've also seen videos coming out of camp of Brandon Staley specifically working one-on-one with Diamador Lenore, something that I thought was pretty cool. It's actually something that you saw Steve Wilkes doing with Charvarius Ward last year, which again, I thought was interesting. Those again, Steve Wilkes, a secondary guy, Brandon Staley, a secondary guy. But Diamador Lenore, singing Brandon Staley's praises. Again, I felt like I was on an island when I said I would be more than happy to bring Brandon Staley in as defensive coordinator when they were still trying to find one. And the fact that they brought him in, he doesn't have that pressure as defensive play caller, but he can come in. He can be a teacher, which is something that every stop that he's been at, that he's been praised for as a teacher. And he can bring just his overall football IQ and coverage IQ to that side of the ball. I think it's going to end up being a pretty awesome hire. And I'm glad that players are already talking about how much they like having him there.
Well, I mean, Staley was a punchline as a head coach, so that's something he's going to have to get over.
Sure.
However it happens, whether it's the stop with the Niners, if he becomes a defensive coordinator somewhere elsewhere after this season, or whatever happens, the only way he's going to get over that punchline status is to come and have success somewhere else. So he's not the defensive coordinator by name here, but certainly his fingerprints are going to be all over the defense. If you don't think that, you're crazy. Yeah, I think he's kind of basically the head coach of the defense. That's what he's here to do. With Sorensen being the coordinator kind of underneath him. So see how it goes with that. Again, for right now, still has a lot to prove. But in terms of this Purdy stuff, I know he's a hot button topic. I know people are there's a lot of people who want to be proven right in that he was a mirage, or he's just a product of your environment, or he's not that good, or just people who want attention, man. Oh, I know Purdy's gonna get me clicks or likes or engagement, so I'm gonna talk about how he did today. I'm going to talk about all the interceptions, and not everybody reporting is like that, but I think that that's part of it. But I came across this article last week that Bill Barnwell wrote. We actually tried to get Bill on the show today. Couldn't do it. He had other commitments. So hopefully maybe at some time we can have him on, because Bill does do a really good job with these articles for ESPN. I read most of his stuff. And this article on Purdy, I thought, was a very honest look at Purdy, the questions and or kind of misconceptions about his game, and what this contract is going to not only look like, but mean to the 49ers. He called it the Brock apocalypse. And he said that there's kind of a ticking time bomb with this roster. So I thought this would be really interesting for Brian and I to look at. And we're going to do that in this show. Now, Brian, the questions or like misconceptions that he talked about in the article and that we're going to highlight here are Purdy on obvious passing situations. Can he operate purely as a drop back quarterback? Does he struggle when he's trailing? Can he throw deep? Can he throw outside the numbers? Does he benefit from having wide open receivers? In other words, does he benefit just from playing under Shanahan? Can he play outside of structure? And then we'll look at that extension numbers and the ticking time bomb that is the roster. So first and foremost, an obvious passing situation. So Barnwell says there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but he went with 3rd and long. So 3rd yards and 8 or more to go. So as you would think, most QBs do worse on 3rd and long. But Brian, Purdy's QBR is 56.6 in those situations, and that's 6th in the NFL. He averages 8.4 yards per throw, which is 5th in the NFL. And his 0.18 expected points added per dropback in those situations is also 5th. So he's been pretty good on obvious passing situations, despite what people would say. So that's the first thing in one of those misconceptions that people are like, he can't do that. Maybe the numbers say otherwise.
Yeah. Again, I don't know. I think it just boils down to this. There is Brock Purdy is really I would call it a dividing line between casual ball watcher and relative ball knower, if you will, right? Like how you feel about Brock Purdy, I feel like really delineates whether you are more of a casual fan, and there's nothing wrong with a casual fan. I'm not at all saying that that's bad. Or a fan that understands the game on a deeper level, if you will. And it's really those underlying numbers that will help you understand that Brock Purdy has been elite since he has taken over as a starting quarterback for the 49ers. And by elite, top 5 is elite, right? That's elite. There's 32 starting quarterbacks. Top 5 is elite. Maybe, or you might argue top 3 is elite. Fine. He's still a top tier quarterback based on production numbers. But the problem is when you look at him and you know where he was drafted, then you go, well, there's no way that he can be good because he's not big enough and he was the last pick in the draft. So obviously if he was the last pick in the draft, everybody else knew that he couldn't be a good quarterback. And so what he's doing is luck. And it's like, here's the thing. Like we know, you and I know, lots of other people know where you were drafted doesn't matter. How big you are doesn't really matter. If you can do what Brock Purdy has done for as long as he has done it. Again, we're talking what he started the last 6 games of his rookie season, and then also, took them on his playoff run, and then he started all of last season, and then took them to the Super Bowl. That's not a small sample size. It's not a massive sample size. This season is important, right? Which is why they haven't. I mean, they can't sign him to an extension, but the extension talk is still talk, right? But there's enough there to show and enough underlying numbers to understand that what he's doing is not just luck, it is repeatable. And, the thing that I thought was interesting, he went even further than just 3rd and long because, he said, if you look at just 3rd and long, the quarterback who ranked 3rd in those spots over the past 2 years by EPA was Garoppolo. And the guy between him and Garoppolo is Tua Tagovailoa, another guy that people, is a lightning rod. For
all over the board on,
Right. Yeah. But so Barnwell said, let's consider another measure of obvious passing situations, which is NFL Next Gen Stats assigns a passing probability to each snap, given what history suggests about down distance and game situation. And if you look at just those plays where there's an expectation of at least 75% that a pass is coming, Purdy's 0.14 EPA per play over the past 2 years ranks 3rd in the league behind Mahomes and Josh Allen. Again, pretty good company. Now Tua is 5th and CJ Stroud is 10th, right? So while there is something to say about the system that he plays in, the argument is, does the system make Brock Purdy? I don't know. But I feel like the other question is, does it matter? Does that really matter? Because that's the system that he plays in.
Right.
If he's going to play in the system that he plays in and he's going to do it at an elite level, then he's going to be really good. And the 49ers are going to be really comfortable moving forward, right? That's all that matters. That's all that matters. Does he play within the system that he has to play in? Well, and the answer is yes. And so, if you put him on the Chiefs, does he do as well as Patrick Mahomes? Probably not, but it doesn't matter. He's not on the Chiefs.
Right. He's not on the Chiefs.
Right. He's not on the Chiefs. He's on the 49ers. So, when it comes to some of these questions, though, like obvious passing downs, Bill Barnwell shows us Brock Purdy passes the sniff test. He's done pretty damn well since taking over as the starting quarterback in San Francisco.
And can he operate as a pure drop back quarterback? Barnwell says his 71.7 QBR without play action over the past 2 years actually leads the league.
Yeah.
It leads the league.
Yeah.
And we know Kyle's offense is built on a lot of play action. And that's one thing people who don't watch Purdy will say, well, he needs the play action. He needs it. Well, obviously not. Again, the numbers say different. Now, I said this was also a very fair look at him. He looks at, does he struggle when he's trailing? So when the Niners are trailing, he does lead the league in yards per attempt over the past 2 seasons, which again,
when trailing,
at least 61 trailing. Now, the issue when he's trailing is that he has been prone to more interceptions. So
Sure.
Purdy's throwing 9 TDs and 9 interceptions when trailing over the last 2 years, and he's got a 35-6 touchdown interception ratio when either tied or ahead. So again, he's a young quarterback. He has a 6% interception rate when trailing. That's high. That's really very high. But again, that's something that maybe he will get out of as he gets older and gets more experience. Now, CJ Stroud didn't throw a single interception while playing from behind during his rookie year. But Stroud was also 16th in the NFL in QBR without a play fake. So, again, Stroud's got to prove in drop back situations. He was better in Purdy when playing from behind. They're both young quarterbacks. These are both things that these quarterbacks can improve on. So again, very fair. Purdy from one behind, a critique on him. Seems like he forces the ball a little bit and gets himself into trouble, but he can operate from a drop back standpoint. He just right now is a little bit few too many turnovers there.
And here's the other thing to keep in mind when you're considering that interception rate and interception percentage when trailing, is that when trailing, that becomes not just obvious passing downs, but the defense knows you're passing. And that becomes true pass sets for an offensive line that isn't great at true pass set pass blocking, right? Like they are not great at just traditional drop back passing pass blocking. And so you got to keep that in mind as well. Like it's all context. All of it is context. And I know context is not something that tends to be taken into account in our hot take internet culture now, right? It's like context is a bad word, but you can't evaluate anything outside of context, right? And so my question is, if we looked at those 9 interceptions that he's thrown while trailing, how many of them have come with pressure in his face? I'd be interested to know that. I don't know that we can find that, but I would be interested to know that. Again, not absolving him of making poor decisions, but just, again, taking into account that this offensive line is not great at true pass sets and is probably not giving him as much time as he would have in a situation where they are either A, not trailing, or B, ahead, if you will.
Hey, fantasy football owners, the road to winning your fantasy football championship starts now. I'm Matt Harmon from Reception Perception. Join me and James Coe as we take a deep dive into the position that's going to make or break your fantasy roster. Wide receivers. We analyze route running, target share, and all the metrics that matter, giving you the insights you need to draft the best wide receivers. As you prep for your draft, let us give you the coverage you need. Follow and listen to Reception Perception on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
And can he throw deep? So this obviously was an issue for the 49ers with Garoppolo. Garoppolo didn't like to throw deep. They were missing those plays, and the points per game for the 49ers showed that. Again, I talked, how much did I talk about before Purdy was in there, that the Niners can't score points. They weren't scoring points. And when McCaffrey came in, they had a couple games where they did and a couple games where they didn't. They didn't score against the Chargers, and might have been the Saints was another game where they had a lot of trouble scoring.
The Saints. They scored 9.
They just couldn't get the big chunks unless it was yak yards with Garoppolo back there. With Purdy, that changed almost instantly, and it changed the offense, and they started scoring 30 points every game. Now, his average pass over the first 2 seasons traveled 7.6 yards in the air, which is a little bit above league average, Purdy. When he does throw deep, He was much more efficient than Garoppolo had been, and his 97.5 QBR on deep balls is the third best mark in football, according to Barnwell.
Third best.
Third best. So
Yep.
when he does throw deep, it's at an elite level, or elite production anyway, I should say. He doesn't quite throw deep as often as other quarterbacks. About 9% of his passes are deep throws. And Barnwell compares that to Stroud, whose mark was a little bit over 11% as a rookie. So again, Shanahan's offense is a lot of over the middle stuff, but they are taking more shots. And when they are, incredibly efficient, incredibly productive when you're talking third in the league. So, and again, this isn't Jimmy Garoppolo, who was pushing 30 years old. And you're like, all right, this is what he is. This is a 23-year-old quarterback who was in his first full season last year. Remember that. His first
coming
full
off an
season
injury
last year, coming off an injury, and was this efficient in all these metrics that we're talking about and in deep balls. So again,
and rehabbing that injury all the way into November.
Yeah. So that's really impressive for me, because that aspect of the 49ers offense was missing. They suffered because of it. And now it makes them dynamic in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And that's, I think the moment he came in, we started talking about that. He's more aggressive than Jimmy Garoppolo. He's willing to take some of those shots. Is he the best deep ball thrower? No. Does he have the biggest arm? No. Is he going to be able to launch 80-yard bombs to Brandon Ayuk or Danny Gray or Deebo Samuel? No, he's not. But he has enough arm to throw deep. And not only that, but he is efficient when he does so. And so that's really all you can ask for is the quarterback willing to take those shots to keep the defense honest? Because the problem for the offense with Jimmy Garoppolo is every other defensive coordinator knew he wasn't taking those shots. So you just have to put a ceiling on him and then flood the zones that you know they're going to attack, and you can stop that offense. If Purdy is going to continue throwing deep, even at the percentage that he is, which was about 9%, which is a little bit below league average, you're keeping other defensive coordinators honest. And that's all you can ask for in that regard. And as he gets older and as he gets more physically, I won't say more physically mature. He's 23 years old. He's probably reached his physical maturity, but again, more years in the league, more off seasons to work on things. I think that's going to be a part of his game that probably gets a little bit better. He's never going to be, a consistent deep ball thrower in the NFL or the best deep ball thrower in the NFL, but no one expects him to be either. Matt Ryan wasn't the best deep ball thrower, but when given the opportunity in Atlanta, he took advantage of him. That's all you can ask for, and that's what Purdy's been doing.
Another thing Garoppolo was not great at was throwing outside the numbers. Barnwell asked, can Purdy be an effective passer when he's throwing routes that break vertically or out to the sidelines? Well, Brian, he averages 0.41 EPA per dropback on those throws the past 2 years. The best mark in football. 2 was second, Prescott was third, Allen is fourth, and Stroud is fifth. And yeah, he says comfortably the best mark in football. Again, pretty damn good. You can't get much better than that. Those are some pretty impressive names, regardless of what you think of Tua. Tua can still be pretty prolific. Tua's problem is when it gets cold and late in the year, it kind of doesn't happen for him. But he's still a prolific quarterback.
Shrinkage.
Yeah, exactly. Tua's problem is shrinkage.
Yes. And that's the other thing is it's going to lead into the next point. But if you hear that, I know that there are going to be people that go, well, yeah, that's because he's always throwing to wide open wide receivers outside the numbers. Is that true, Al? What does Bill say about that?
It's not. Does he benefit from throwing to more wide open receivers? So on a whole, Bill says Purdy's intended targets aren't notably open. The average separation between his receiver and the nearest defender is 3.5 yards, which is exactly league average. Next Gen Stats also splits the separation rates up into buckets, which gives us some further insight. Again, I'm reading Barnwell here. More than 47% of Purdy's throws are to open receivers, which is defined at least 3 yards of separation at the time the pass arrives, which is well above league average of 43.4%. It's the seventh highest mark in football. At the same time, though, just 21.2% of Purdy's passes are to wide open receivers, 5 yards or more of separation, which is 25th in the league the past 2 years. So his guys are open, but not crazy wide open.
Well, and he also says that those trends hold if you just focus on in-breaking routes, which are famous in the Shanahan offense, right? The Shanahan offense is famous for in-breaking routes, which are easier for quarterbacks to throw. But when Barnwell says that when we just focus on the in-breaking routes, so it's not strictly the same trends hold. So it's not strictly a product of where Purdy throws the ball. Purdy's receivers are open, but they're not wide open. And again, isn't that the goal? Isn't that the goal? As a wide receiver, isn't the goal to get open? Isn't that the goal of the wide receiver? Isn't that the goal of route design, is to get a guy open? That's the point. So again, it's the question of, is he operating the offense to the best of its ability? Yes. The offense is designed to get guys open, and Purdy knows where those guys are going to be open and can throw the ball to that window. Is that a tight window? No. Does it have to be a tight window? No. Would you prefer it to be an open window than a tight window as Kyle Shanahan or Brock Purdy? 100%. So again, it's not about, it's not like, again, he's throwing to guys that where there's no defender in the screen. That's Barnwell's like, no, it's not that. It's average open. It's average open yardage, right? 3 to 3.5 yards. I mean, that's it. So again, he is not a product of wide open wide receivers. He's a product of a system that gets wide receivers open. And he can operate that system better than anybody else that we've seen in that position in San Francisco since Kyle Shanahan's been there.
That was always a comical thing to me. Like, and Peter King said this to us. He said this almost verbatim when we had him on. How'd CJ Beathard do? How'd Nick Mullins do? How'd Jimmy Garoppolo do? Other quarterbacks have been in this system. The only two that have played really to this level are Matt Ryan and Brock Purdy. That's it. Shanahan's been a coach in the league for what? Offense for 20 years? 20 years?
Close, yeah.
These are the only two. So, come on. Now, what about out of structure? Well, Mahomes and Allen rank 1 and 2 in EPA per dropback when they hold the ball for more than 4 seconds. Those are the two best, right? You would think of making things happen and everything else. Purdy ranks 5th in EPA per dropback and number 1 in success rate. I mean, so he may not be creating as many explosive plays as Allen or Mahomes in those situations, but he's producing steady gains more often than anybody else.
Right.
So again, out of structure, when all hell breaks loose, when everything breaks down around you, didn't we see that in the playoffs? He won those games with his legs.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have his best fastball in either playoff game. But when it got out of structure, you saw him be able to make plays with his legs. We've seen him make throws, some crazy throws, where he's running around and he's got that gunslinger Tony Romo thing. And sometimes you hold your breath. That's the way it works with those plays. But you don't hold your breath with Josh Allen. You know what I mean? So it's like, again,
guarantee Bills fans do.
That absolutely do. It's another positive for Purdy. Another thing that he does, that he can play out of structure and makes things happen when the play breaks down. And for people who say that he can't or try to take that away from him, you are not watching the games. You are not. Or you just have an opinion of him that you're unwilling to change because you don't want to be wrong. Barnwell proves it here again. He's one of the best out of structure quarterbacks in the NFL.
That 10-yard split, right, where he's just a shade slower than Christian McCaffrey, shows up in stats like that, right? His escapability is really, really, really high. And again, is he going to win games with his legs? No. Is he going to extend drives with his legs? Absolutely. And that is going to help win games as you move forward, right? He's not Lamar Jackson. He's not Josh Allen, right? Is he going to get some rushing touchdowns? Probably. But what I love about him is his ability to escape pressure, to extend plays and get the ball into his playmaker's hands, because that's what he's looking to do. And if he can't, then he can scramble for 5, 10, 15, 20 yards and call it good and slide and then get up and start over, right? It's what he did against the Lions. It's one of the things that Steve Spagnuolo was scared to death about. He talked about it. Steve Spagnuolo in the Super Bowl said, "We are afraid of Brock Purdy with the ball in his hands." He genuinely, like, that was verbatim. They were afraid of him, and they did a good job of making sure that, they kept those rush lanes tight and he wasn't able to escape. But whether you think it or not, defensive coordinators are afraid of Brock Purdy's legs. And I think rightfully so, because again, like I said, he's never going to be a game changer with his legs, but he is going to be a drive extender, which can, again, lead, at least goes a long way towards leading them to victory.
Barnwell projects what he thinks his contract is going to be. I think this is too high, Brian. So he says 5 years, $325 million. I don't get how he would go that high, because where are we right now? What did Love just get? $55 million a year?
Yeah. So here are the three most recent quarterback contracts, right? Jared Goff signed earlier in this offseason. And then Jordan Love and Tua Tagovailoa both signed fairly recently. Jordan Love signed a 4-year, $220 million contract. That's an average annual value of $55 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
And $100.8 million guaranteed at signing, with a $75 million signing bonus, which means that in 2024, the Green Bay Packers are paying Jordan Love $79 million in cash.
Oof.
Not bad for Jordan Love. And his how many starts? I'm not sure. Not that many.
Not that many. 18 maybe?
Yeah.
19, something like that. Not that many.
So 4 years, $220 million. If you look at Tua, it is a little bit lower. It is 4 years, $212.4 million for an annual average value of $53.1 million, with a $42 million signing bonus and $93.171 guaranteed at signing, which means in 2024 the Miami Dolphins are paying Tua Tagovailoa $43.125 million in cash.
Wow.
His 2024 cap hit is still only $9.5 million. Jordan's 2024 cap hit is $20.7 million. And then for Jared Goff, he signed an extension, 4 years. It's almost identical to Tua's. 4 years, $212 million. So he didn't get that extra $500,000, extra $400,000 that Tua got. Tua was 4 for 212.4. Goff is 4 for 212, $53 million yearly, $73 million signing bonus, $113.6 guaranteed at signing, which is the highest of the three. But part of that is because this was an extension, on top of a contract that was already big, right? Because this bumps Goff's career earnings thus far to $161 million. Good for Jared Goff. But again, total guaranteed at signing is 113.6, total guaranteed 170.6, but that includes the contract that he already had, because this is again an extension.
Who's up? Prescott, who I don't.
Prescott is.
It seems like he's going to hit free agency next year.
Prescott is up, and Purdy
theoretically signed before him, if the Niners just get this taken care of and extend it, right?
Yeah.
So
and they have that advantage, right? Because if the Cowboys aren't the one that's signing Dak and he hits the market, obviously teams can't sign until the new league year. So the 49ers could get it done theoretically, like they did Jimmy Garoppolo, after the season ends, before free agency starts.
And they'd be nuts not to, assuming he has a similar year this year. But I can't imagine it's going to jump from 55 to 65. I think it'll go to 60. I think he'll get 5 years, $300 million. But I don't know about 325. If they win the Super Bowl and he gets Super Bowl MVP, I guess. But I don't think it's going to be that high. It's insane. I saw something about doing a salary cap for quarterbacks, that the NFL was thinking about that. You may have to at this point, because the contracts are just getting more and more ridiculous. And you're paying guys who are not Mahomes and Allen these absurd numbers. It's where the market is right now, and if it stays this way, that's where Purdy's going to be. But it's such a huge number, and the Niners already, over the next 2 years, they have more than $319 million in cash going to their roster in 2024, which is the fourth highest of any team. And next year, it's going to be more than $230 million projected, which is the fifth highest of any team. So on top of that, they have contract situations with Ayuk, Hufanga, Greenlaw, Ward, Demo, Trent Williams.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people to pay. And one of the other things that Barnwell talks about, there is room. Javon Hargrave may not be around. Malik Collins has a $10 million cap year. I don't know that he'll see that. But the ticking time bomb on the 49ers roster is sort of that they made this trade for Lance.
Mm-hmm.
It's according to Barnwell, okay? And he said, okay, on one hand, you get Purdy in the 7th round. So you traded for Lance, but it didn't hurt you because you still got this franchise quarterback. It's true, and I don't even want to think where the Niners would be if they didn't get Purdy in the 7th round. But those 3 picks that you didn't have for Lance, well, now you don't have the depth that you had in previous seasons. And not only that, you don't have guys, not only because of the trade, but the other people they drafted, they don't have a lot of guys coming into their primes that can really carry them into the next window. And that's what he talks about for the ticking time bomb for them. When you look at the drafts through 2020, you got all these blue chip dudes, Fred Warner, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Nick Bosa, and they all are kind of aging into their prime. And who after that is a blue chip guy that they've drafted?
Yeah, they've drafted,
Purdy.
yeah.
That's it.
Lenore is probably
possibly Lenore as well. We don't even know if they're going to resign Lenore at this point. If they're going to go with Ward, we don't know. Mm-hmm. So there is an issue moving forward with the roster. If some of these guys don't hit and you pay Purdy what we think you're going to have to pay him, and the Eagles are paying a lot of their offensive guys, right? It seems like they're paying the whole offense, but the Eagles don't have Nick Bosa, who's making quarterback money. They don't have Fred Warner, who's making in the 20 millions. So the Eagles have paid their offense for at least this year. But eventually, again, that'll come home to roost too.
Yeah.
Niners, if the guys like Pearsall and these guys that they took recently, if they don't start to hit with some of these guys, you could be in trouble. And if Purdy is not top tier quarterback, franchise quarterback, if he doesn't continue to ascend or play really well, you got a problem. That's kind of what Barnwell says is eventually some of these guys are aging out. You're going to have to get rid of Williams or Kittle in the next year or two. You're going to have to make decisions with a Greenlaw, Ward, or Lenore because of this Purdy contract. And then you have the Ayuk thing on top of it. And if these other guys don't step up, all of a sudden this Niners roster goes from ridiculous like it is right now to, we need our quarterback to be really good because now we can't afford all these other luxuries.
Well, and one of the things he points out, again, he gives this Barnwell article is great. And he really he uses multiple examples to show how different teams handle paying their quarterback, right? He brings up the Bengals, he brings up the Chiefs, and then he brings up the Eagles. And one of the things that he says about the Eagles that is interesting is the Eagles in 2024 are spending more than $213 million in cash on their offense, right? Which is the most expensive offense in NFL history. Because they're paying Jalen Hurts, they're paying Saquon Barkley, they're paying AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, they're paying Dallas Goedert, they paid Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson, their 2 tackles, and they paid their guard Landon Dickerson a good amount of money as well. But what Barnwell points out is that while that means that the Eagles aren't spending nearly as much on the defensive side as the 49ers are, they still have meaningful investments on that side of the ball, largely from the draft, right? They paid Bryce Huff in free agency, and Josh Sweat, their other D end, is on a significant deal. But they have Darius Slay, right? There's money there. They re-signed James Bradbury, again, not a lot of money, but you look at their defensive line, they've got 3 first-rounders in Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Nolan Smith. And then even in this draft this year, they had to address their secondary. They were able to do so with 2 of arguably the 4 best defensive backs in the draft in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. And so that's where, again, Barnwell points out this ticking time bomb where the 49ers are going to have to switch. I don't want to say models, but they're going to have to switch gears once they pay Brock Purdy. And one of those gears is they are going to have to start hitting in the draft. They did so early on, But the last handful of drafts have been pretty piss poor when you look at overall what they were able to get out of them, besides Brock Purdy in the 7th round, which makes that draft a winning draft regardless of anything else, right?
Because it was horrible. It was horrible other than that.
Right.
Horrible.
But when you look at the rest of that draft, you're like, oh man, that is gnarly. And then even last year's draft, right, where you don't have a pick until the 3rd round because of the failed Lance trade and then the CMC trade, which obviously was not a failure. No one's ever going to, bemoan that trade. But again, you didn't get to pick until the 3rd round. And one of the first pick you made might be contributing this year in Jair Brown. But the second pick you made is Jake Moody, who had his issues last year. Hopefully, he moves forward as just a reliable kicker. And then Cam Latu, who has been mentioned positively in camp so far, which is a good thing. But again, we don't expect a lot out of that. So that's where the rubber meets the road, though, because once you pay your quarterback, you need cheap depth, and that you get that in the draft.
We know nothing about this year's draft, right? Because I just haven't hit the field yet. But let's look at the draft since Lance, and I want you to tell me what players look like cornerstones of the next window. Not like, oh yeah, he's going to be a backup linebacker. Cornerstones.
Right.
Because they drafted an awful lot of cornerstones in 2017 through 2020.
Correct.
A lot of cornerstones. Okay. So let's go through. Trey Lance, obviously not. Aaron Banks, I don't think he's going to be on the team next year.
Because they're not going to pay what the market pays for interior offensive linemen.
Not a horrible pick because you got 3 years of starting out of him, but also not a cornerstone moving forward. Trey Sermon, obviously no. Ambry Thomas, no. Jalen Moore, he's a backup. Lenore,
I would say yes.
I think he's going to be, Okay, so
I think they pay Lenore over Ward just because Lenore's younger.
Yeah, I think Lenore is going to be there. So that's and in the 5th round, that's a terrific pick. Hufanga, great pick. I don't think he's back next year.
Yeah,
I think Mustafa's there to replace him. So again,
Mustafa's a more athletic Talanoa Hufanga.
Yeah. So again, he is not going to be a core piece of the next window. At least, I don't see it that way. Eli Mitchell, again, terrific 6th round pick, not going to be around next year. Drake Jackson, 2022, looks like a horrible pick. His days may be over. TDP, Danny Gray, Burford. I know they like him, but again, right now he's just borderline
backup
replacement level guard.
Yeah, he's a rotational backup offensive lineman.
Sam Womack, no. Nick Zakel, no. Kalia Davis, you hope he's a rotational guy this year.
Yep.
Castro Fields, no. And Purdy. So you have Purdy and Lenore in 2 drafts that look like they're going to be corner pieces. I know next year, even last year is kind of hard to know, but this class doesn't look like anything we're doing backflips about. Jair Brown, so far so good.
Mm-hmm.
Jake Moody, you used a 3rd round pick on a kicker when you needed a lot of players. So there we are. Latu, no. Luter, I know they like him, but is he even going to be in the top 5 or 6 this year? Robert Beal, again, not somebody that I'm really considering.
Which is wild because when you look at the D-end room, like without Drake Jackson there, they need more bodies. Like Beal has to be a contributor for them. Beal has to be because they don't.
But again, you're looking at this point. In fairness to Luter and Beal and Winters and Willis and Bell and Graham, who are the rest of the guys they drafted, they're 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks.
Right.
No, the Niners have hit on a lot of those, but we don't expect them to come in and be those type of players. And that's where they are with those last 3 drafts. I'm not even going to go through this past year because we have no idea. Right. But out of those last 3 drafts, you really got Purdy and Lenore. That again, not like, oh, well, I guess they could start, or oh, I guess they're decent. No, next window, core pieces, a Kittle, a Warner, those type of guys. Even like McGlinchey, like he wasn't. I know people had their issues with him, but like he was like a core piece for 5 years on the team. So like a lot of these guys who moved on for Hufanga with his injury, you're going to get like 2.5 years of him as a core piece, maybe. Maybe he had that one really great year, and then he didn't play the first year. There's an injury. We'll see what happens this year. So there just hasn't been a lot of that the last 3 years they built into this, this juggernaut. I don't see it.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we also have to keep in mind when we do talk about these drafts, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't point out the deficiencies in them, because we should, but the other thing that you got to think about is their draft strategy going in, right? Like, they've essentially been drafting as a Super Bowl favorite since 2019, right? Like 2020, 2021, 2022, right? Like, every time they draft, they're drafting because with the mindset that we are in our Super Bowl window, we are a Super Bowl ready team, right? And so a lot of times you hear Kyle Shanahan say, like, well, we didn't go with that guy because we didn't think that he could come in and supplant so-and-so at this position, right? Like, you're not just going to beat out. So I've heard him say it so many times. Like, I remember one time it was, you're not just going to come in and beat out a Cassius Marsh. And I was like, wait a second, Kyle.
I remember that.
What are we doing here, right? Like, but he has said that consistently since being there, right? So I feel like even their draft strategy is going to have to start to change, because you are going to have to start taking some swings on talent, right? Hoping that even if you're taking swings in the 3rd, 4th round, you're taking swings on guys that will be possibly like a core player moving forward, rather than we are just drafting for depth because we've got vet starters all over this team that we know are going to be starters. We're not going to get rookies that are going to push these guys. Well, eventually you're going to need rookie starters, because you can't pay enough veterans to be starters, right? Because you're paying Brock Purdy. So their whole draft strategy, I think, is going to have to take they're going to have to take a look at it, and it's going to have to shift a little bit as well.
Well, look at what they've had to do. They had to pay Hargrave because they missed on Kinlaw.
Right.
They had to trade for Chase Young and go out and get Leonard Floyd because they missed on Drake Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
They had to trade for Christian McCaffrey. Thank God they did, but they had to trade for Christian McCaffrey because they missed on I don't know how many running backs.
I think no matter what, you're making that trade, but yeah, I agree.
Probably, yeah. But the point is there that they've had to sign free agents because they have missed on these guys in the draft, and with Purdy's contract now, you're not gonna be able to do that. Right. So you better be able to start hitting on some of these guys.
Yep.
So
100%. That's the time bomb. That's the time bomb that's there.
That's the time bomb. There it is. But hey, listen, ignore interceptions. Listen to your friend Al. Ignore training camp interceptions. Check out this article by Barnwell if you haven't, because it is really good. Subscribe to the show, where you get your podcasts on YouTube. Our YouTube is doing really well since training camp started. Please subscribe. Check it out. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. And we'll talk to you later in the week.
Later.
9 on 3. 1, 2, 3. Hey!
2400 Sports is an Odyssey company.